Nobody warns you that the family you marry into can be the one lying to you, not the family you were born into. I didn't figure that out in one dramatic night. It came in pieces, small ones. The kind you keep explaining away because you're 62 years old and you told yourself you were done being surprised by people. Her name was Danielle. For 11 months, I believed she was the best thing that had happened to me since I lost my wife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just joining me, my name is Walter Okafor Briggs. Everybody who knows me calls me Walt. I spent 34 years running a family construction business outside Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind that builds custom homes for people who've worked their whole lives to afford one. My father started it with a pickup truck and a set of borrowed tools in 1969. I took it over at 29, and my son Marcus runs the day-to-day now, while I mostly show up to keep everybody honest. My late wife, Carol, passed 6 years ago, and after that, I figured the second half of my life was going to be quiet. Grandkids, church on Sunday, fishing on the lake behind my house. I wasn't looking for anything else. Family, for us, is not a suggestion. It's the whole architecture. My daughter Renee lives 15 minutes away with her husband and my 2 grandbabies. My brother Cornell shows up on my porch most Sunday afternoons without calling first, and nobody in this family has ever once considered that rude. We're loud. We argue about football at the dinner table, and when somebody's hurting, everybody shows up, whether you ask them to or not. So when I tell you I met Danielle at my grandson's Little League banquet, and by 3 months in, I was already imagining her at my table every Sunday, understand what that means coming from a man my age. I wasn't looking for love again. I'd made peace with being alone. I'd had one marriage that lasted 40 years, and I didn't believe lightning struck twice. Danielle walked into that banquet hall in a soft yellow dress, laughing at something her cousin said, and something about her settled into me the way morning coffee does. She was 41, a hospital administrator, sharp as anything, but she had this way of listening to people that made you feel like you were the only one in the room. My grandson struck out twice that night, and she was the first one on her feet cheering when he finally connected. I noticed that before I noticed anything else about her. We started seeing each other, slow and easy, the way 2 grown people do when neither one is trying to prove anything. She met my daughter Renee within the first month. By month 3, she was at Sunday dinner, learning how I like my greens cooked and letting my grandkids climb all over her without complaint. My brother Cornell pulled me aside on the porch one Sunday and said, "Walt, that woman looks at you like you hung the moon. Don't you mess this up." I proposed to her on the dock behind my house on a warm evening in April. No fanfare, just the 2 of us, and a ring I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket for 2 weeks, working up the nerve. She said yes before I even got the whole sentence out. My daughter cried when I called her. Cornell said, "Finally, somebody who can keep you in line." I was, if I'm honest with you, happier than I'd been since Carol passed. And I had no earthly idea what was already sitting underneath all of it. Welcome back to the channel, family. Settle in, because this one's going to take you somewhere you don't expect. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and I promise you, this story is worth the ride. Here's something you need to understand about Danielle before anything else. She wasn't cold. She wasn't guarded in the way people usually are when something's wrong underneath. She was warm, quick to laugh, generous with her time. She made me feel like a man in his 60s still had plenty of life left to be excited about. So when the subject of her own family came up, and it came up early, because in my world family comes up early, her answer didn't strike me as a warning sign. It struck me as a wound. "My parents and I don't speak," she told me one evening, maybe 5 weeks in. We were sitting on my back porch, watching the sun go down over the lake. They were hard on me growing up. Old-fashioned, controlling, especially my father. I had to put real distance between us just to become who I am. Her eyes stayed fixed on the water while she said it, steady, like someone who'd told this story to herself so many times it had worn smooth. "I'm sorry," I said. "What else can you say to something like that?" "It's fine. I just don't talk about it much. They won't be at the wedding. I need you to understand that." Going in, I told her it didn't matter to me, and at the time, it didn't, because I trusted her. She hadn't given me one reason not to. What I hadn't fully accounted for was my family. Not that anybody was unkind to Danielle. They weren't. Not for 1 second. But the Briggs family runs on a particular frequency, and that frequency includes a deep need to know the people connected to the people we love. It isn't nosiness. It isn't judgment. We just believe you understand a person better once you understand where they came from, who raised them, and what table they sat at as a child. By the 10th month of our engagement, the silence around Danielle's family had started making its own kind of noise. It came to a head on a Sunday evening in late June. Renee had made her famous smothered chicken, the recipe that takes half a Saturday to get right, and we were all crowded around my table. Me, Danielle, Renee and her husband, Cornell, and my grandkids arguing over who got the last biscuit. Everything was moving along fine, until Cornell, who has never once in his life considered the social consequences of a question, set down his fork and looked straight at Danielle. "Danielle, sweetheart, I got to ask you something." She smiled. "Sure, Cornell. Where's your people at?" The table went quiet, the way it does when somebody says the thing everybody's been carefully stepping around. Danielle's smile held, but her eyes shifted, just slightly. "My parents and I aren't in touch. I've mentioned that. I know you mentioned it. I'm asking about it." Cornell wasn't being cruel. He was being Cornell. Because, in this family, and I say this with love, you don't marry somebody whose family you've never laid eyes on. It's not how we do things. "Cornell," my voice. One low word. He picked his fork back up. But the question was already sitting on that table, and no amount of smothered chicken was putting it back in the ground. Later that night, after Danielle had gone home, my daughter found me in the kitchen. Renee poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. "She's a good woman, Daddy," she said. It wasn't a question. "She is. I believe that." Renee nodded slow. "But we're about to be in a church. We're going to make promises in front of God and everybody we know. And we're going to do it without ever having met a single one of her people. Her parents were hard on her, Renee. I understand that. I believe her." She set her glass down on the counter. "Bad people are still out there somewhere, Daddy. They got an address. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into." I didn't say anything. She squeezed my shoulder and went back to the living room. I stood there in my daughter's kitchen, a long while after that. But here's what I need you to understand. I still wasn't suspicious. Not really. Not of Danielle. If anything, I was worried about myself. Because the thought I couldn't shake, the one that kept circling on my drive home that night, was this. What if her parents look at me and decide I'm not what they wanted for their daughter? I know how that sounds coming from a man who's built a successful business and raised a good family, but Danielle moved in a very particular world. Hospital administration, downtown Charlotte, the kind of social circle where everybody's got a graduate degree and an opinion about wine. Her condo looked like something out of a magazine. Her friends wore brands I had to look up. She carried herself with a kind of polish that I found attractive, but that sometimes, quietly, made me feel a little too country, a little too loud, a little too close to Cornell. What if her parents were the same? What if they had money and standards and expectations I didn't know about? What if they looked at me and Danielle saw everything through their eyes, and something changed? That was my real fear. Driving into work the following Monday, I wasn't thinking I was about to uncover a lie. I wasn't thinking anything was wrong. I figured I was about to meet intimidating people who might decide I wasn't good enough, and my plan was to show up, take whatever they gave me, and try to convince them I was the man their daughter had chosen. I honestly believed I was the underdog in this story. Finding her parents didn't take a private investigator. It took a routine, tedious piece of paperwork. 10 months into our engagement, Danielle had moved into a rental property that belongs to my company. I own 3 small apartment buildings around Charlotte. Nothing fancy, just something Carol and I built up over the years for retirement income. Since we were getting married in a matter of weeks, my office manager needed her to formally sign the lease renewal for tax purposes. It was sitting on my desk on a Friday afternoon when my office manager dropped the paperwork in front of me. I glanced down at the official ID she'd uploaded to the portal. Danielle Renee Marsh, not Foster, the name she used on social media and introduced to my friends. Marsh. Out of pure curiosity, I ran a quick property search under that name, A few clicks turned up an old public record, a dormant Facebook profile untouched since college, and a home address on Willow Creek Lane in a small town called Ellery, about 90 minutes east of Charlotte. That same Friday, I told Danielle I had a site visit scheduled for Saturday morning. She kissed me goodbye without looking up from her laptop. The whole drive out, I kept running through introductions in my head, quietly dreading the moment somebody opened a door and looked at me like I wasn't what they had in mind. I got off the highway and rolled into Ellery just before 10 in the morning. I followed the GPS into a neighborhood of modest little houses, clean streets, American flags on the porches, the kind of place where people know their neighbors by name and wave from the driveway. I slowed down. There it was. A well-kept ranch house with a flower bed running along the walkway and wind chimes on the porch. And in the front yard, moving slow with a garden hose, was an older man in a faded Carolina Panthers t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watering that flower bed with the patient rhythm of a man who had nowhere else more important to be. This is not what I pictured. I sat in my truck for a full 5 minutes, recalibrating everything. No gate, no fancy car in the driveway. Not one sign that the people living in this house had ever spent a single moment worrying about whether somebody was good enough for anything. These are not intimidating people. These are ordinary, good people. And for one clean, unmistakable second, I felt real relief. I got out of my truck and walked up the path. He spotted me when I was about 10 feet away and narrowed his eyes with that cautious look people get when a stranger walks toward them. "Can I help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name's Walt Briggs. I'm engaged to your daughter, Danielle." Harold Marsh dropped the hose, not fumbled it, just let it go. Water ran slow across the driveway while he stared at me, and his face did something I was not at all prepared for. It broke, not with anger, not with suspicion, but with relief. 2 years of accumulated hurt finally finding somewhere to land. "Barbara," his voice cracked on her name. "Barbara, come out here." And right there, standing on the porch of a house in Ellery, watching a retired mailman try to pull himself together, my understanding of the whole situation turned itself upside down. Inside the Marsh house, everything I thought I knew about Danielle started coming apart, quiet and methodical. While I drank coffee I hadn't asked for and ate cookies, Barbara sat down with shaking hands. The house was clean and modest and completely full of Danielle. School pictures, birthday photos, a prom picture on the mantle, a college graduation portrait where Harold and Barbara stood on either side of her, beaming. Harold had his arm around her shoulders. Barbara's face was so proud, it was almost hard to look at. These were not the faces of abusive people. These were the faces of parents who missed their daughter. The story unfolded carefully. Harold had been a mail carrier for 29 years before retiring. Barbara had worked as a school secretary in the Ellery district for most of Danielle's childhood. They'd helped put her through East Carolina University, full scholarship, no debt owed to her parents, and they were proud of that, deeply proud. When Danielle moved to Charlotte and started building her career, things shifted little by little. Calls got shorter, visits stopped. She started showing up online with a different last name, Foster. Her middle name at events with people Harold and Barbara didn't recognize. Wearing a version of herself they didn't fully recognize either. Then came the wedding conversation, the request for $80,000. Harold's counteroffer, heavy with disappointment, $12,000. Everything they could give without wrecking their retirement. Danielle's response had been, "If you can't invest in my future, you're not part of it," blocked that same night. Barbara slid something across the table, a sealed birthday card, never opened, stamped, returned to sender, in red. Danielle's handwriting on the return address label. Their address. I stared at that red stamp on the envelope, then slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the text Danielle had sent me the night before, the one I'd read right before I fell asleep, the one that had pushed me to make this drive in the first place. "Baby, such good news." I reached out to my parents. "They finally apologized for everything and want to meet you for lunch before their trip. So excited you're finally going to meet them." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked up slowly. Harold and Barbara Marsh sat right across from me, completely unaware of the digital reality their daughter was building in real time. I turned my phone around and showed them the screen. Barbara read it. She set the phone down gently and didn't say a word. Harold looked out the kitchen window toward the flower bed he'd been watering when I pulled up. I thought about the drive over, my rehearsed introductions, my quiet dread of not being good enough for these people. I almost laughed. I almost laughed because I'd spent weeks worried that Danielle's parents would look down on me, that they'd be too polished, too wealthy, too demanding. And here they were in Ellery, in a ranch house on Willow Creek Lane, with wind chimes, a garden hose, and 2 years of unopened birthday cards. The person who decided somebody wasn't good enough wasn't them. It was her. It had always been her. And just like that, the man who'd driven out nervous about making a good impression, that man was gone. The man who drove back to Charlotte that afternoon was thinking about something else entirely. The difference between a good liar and a great one is that the great one never breaks character. Not even at the table. Not even when everything's collapsing. I didn't confront her that night. I want to make that clear. Because it matters. I got back to our place a little after 2, sat in my truck for a solid 10 minutes, and made a very deliberate decision. Not yet. Not because I was scared. Not because I doubted what I'd just seen and heard in that kitchen, but because I'm my father's son. And my father taught me something about the moment right before a confrontation that most people misunderstand. He used to say, "Walt, the man who reacts first almost never wins. Let them finish the lie. A half-told lie is just an argument. A fully told lie is a confession." I rode the elevator up to our floor and stood outside the door a moment. I could hear Danielle inside, moving around to the low sound of the television, completely at ease, completely unaware of anything. I put the key in the lock and went in. She was on the couch with a glass of white wine and her laptop open to a venue website. She looked up and smiled the way she always did. Warm, kind, like I was the best part of her day. "How was the site visit?" "Promising," I said. "Long drive, though. You look tired. You want me to order something?" What I wanted to say was, "Explain to me why your mother's unopened birthday card is sitting in a drawer in Ellery with our return address stamped and red on it." That's what I wanted. "Sure," I said instead. "Whatever you're in the mood for." I sat down beside her. She rested her head on my shoulder for a moment and went back to scrolling venue photos. I looked at the screen and saw nothing. On the outside, completely normal. On the inside, I was taking the whole thing apart, piece by piece. That night, I lay awake in the dark and did what I do when I'm working through something complicated. I separated what I knew from what I assumed and built a timeline. What I knew, Danielle's real last name was Marsh. Her parents were Harold and Barbara Marsh, of Ellery, North Carolina, alive, present, and heartbroken. They hadn't abused her. They hadn't been controlling or toxic in any way Harold, Barbara, or a single photograph in that house suggested. They'd offered her $12,000 for the wedding, been told it wasn't enough, and been erased that same night. What I knew, Danielle had texted me while sitting in her parents' kitchen, telling me those same parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch, which meant she was already building the next floor of the lie, which meant there was a next floor, which meant there was somebody she planned to bring to that lunch. Who? That was the question I was trying to answer before I finally fell asleep. I didn't have to wait long. Over the following 3 days, I paid attention differently. Not suspiciously. I was careful about that. I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her. I just listened. The way you listen, once you finally understand that every conversation's been running on 2 levels at once, and you've only been hearing one of them. I noticed she'd started mentioning her boss, a man named Preston Callahan, more than she used to. Preston thinks, offhand, that the Ridgemont account might close sooner than expected. Apparently his wife, Linda Callahan, had been at that same fundraiser too. Small mentions, nothing alarming. The kind of thing a person drops into conversation when they're trying to get someone comfortable with a name before that name becomes important. She was easing me into them. She'd been doing it for weeks, and I'd never once noticed. Preston Callahan. I looked him up from my office the following Tuesday morning. Door closed. Senior Vice President at Danielle's Hospital Network, a healthcare administration firm headquartered downtown. His photo on the company website showed a man in his mid-50s, silver hair, The kind of natural confidence that only comes from decades of never having to explain yourself to anybody. His wife, Linda, turned up in a social column, covering a charity gala in Charlotte 2 years earlier. Polished hair, highlights, the whole picture. A wealthy, respectable couple. Exactly the kind of people you'd want standing beside you if you were trying to convince a close-knit, Southern family that you came from somewhere impressive. There they are. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the Callahans' corporate photo a long while. That's when it hit me that Danielle wasn't just a liar. She was trapped in a prison of her own overwhelming insecurity. She'd spent a decade reinventing herself in Charlotte, reshaping her identity to climb a social ladder that my family never cared about, but her professional friends clearly did. When her father refused to sacrifice his retirement for one day of theater, it wasn't just a money disagreement to her. In her mind, his modesty threatened the polished illusion of success she'd sacrificed everything to build. To keep the lie alive, she hadn't just distanced herself from them. She'd had to erase them completely. And then I thought about what she must have told the Callahans to get them to agree to this, because here's what I know about people like Preston and Linda Callahan. They didn't get where they are by being careless or foolish. For Danielle to get them to sit down at a lunch table and present themselves as her parents, she had to have given them something that made sense. A coherent story, something moving enough that two busy, important people would say yes without asking too many questions. What did she tell them? I let it sit 2 days, and on Thursday morning my phone buzzed with a reminder Danielle had added to our shared calendar. Lunch, Preston and Linda, at Halcyon Grill, Saturday, 12:30. She'd added a note underneath. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, baby. This means everything to me. I stared at that note a long time. Means everything to me. I thought about Barbara Marsh pressing a sealed birthday card across her kitchen table. I thought about Harold's face when he read that text over my shoulder. Yeah, I bet it does. That same Thursday, I called my daughter from my truck, engine running, parked outside my own office. Renee picked up on the second ring. I need to talk to you. Come by the house. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at my own kitchen table. The same table where Danielle had charmed everybody, where Cornell had asked his question, where everything had seemed completely fine 2 weeks earlier. And I laid it all out, every bit of it. Ellery, Harold and Barbara, the birthday card, the text, Preston, and Linda Callahan. Renee sat across from me with her hands folded on the table and listened without interrupting once. When I finished, the kitchen went quiet a moment. Then she said, "What do you need?" 4 words. That's it. No lecture. No, I told you so. No dramatic reaction. I need to build something bigger than this, I said. She nodded slowly. And the Marshes? I'm going back to Ellery after the lunch. I want to know if they're willing to be part of what comes next. She looked at me steady. And what comes next? A dinner, I said. A real gathering, with the right people in the room. Another pause. Then Renee stood up, straightened her sleeves, and said, I'll talk to your brother about the restaurant. That was the whole conversation. Cornell's reaction was a little less contained. He came into the kitchen from the living room, where apparently he'd been listening to the whole thing, which in this family is not considered eavesdropping. It's simply considered being present. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, and an expression I can only describe as the specific fury of a man who watched somebody eat his sister-in-law's smothered chicken and lie to her the whole time. You fed her at my table, he said, and her mama's sitting in Ellery with a birthday card sent back unopened. I know that poor family, Walt. I know, Cornell. He stared at me a long moment. Then he clapped a hand on my shoulder. You fix it, he said quietly. Not just for you, for them too. Saturday came. Halcyon Grill downtown is exactly the kind of place where the lighting is designed to make everyone look a little more important than they actually are. Danielle had made the reservation. As expected, I arrived 5 minutes early and took a seat facing the door. They walked in together, Danielle in the middle, one hand looped through Preston Callahan's arm, Linda on her other side. Danielle was glowing. Preston moved with the ease of a man who'd never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. Linda was all warm smiles and careful posture. I stood when they reached the table. Big smile. Firm handshake. Dad. Mom. Danielle said, her voice colored with a particular triumph. This is my father, Preston, and my mother, Linda. Preston, Linda. Not Harold, not Barbara. Preston, Linda. I shook both their hands. I've heard so much about you two. I hadn't heard anything about them, because they hadn't existed in this role until about a week earlier. We sat, opened our menus, and for the next 20 minutes, I watched Danielle perform with a fluency that, under any other circumstances, would have genuinely impressed me. She laughed at Preston's comments half a beat too fast. She referenced shared memories with Linda. Trips, restaurants, family moments got mentioned, and Linda followed along carefully, the way someone does when they're working from a script they only half know. Preston was smoother. He asked me questions about the construction business, made informed comments about the Charlotte housing market, generally carried himself like a man who'd done his homework and meant to be convincing. Everybody at that table was acting. The whole table was a stage, and I sat there eating grilled trout, being absolutely charming. "So, Preston," I said, setting my fork down with the relaxed calm of a man without a single worry in the world. "Danielle's told me a lot about you. Clearly you've had a real presence in her life." Preston smiled. "She's been like family to us. Like family. That's everything. Means so much to us," I said. I looked at Danielle when I said it. She gave me that radiant smile right back. "Keep smiling, sweetheart. I'm going to be honest with you both," I went on, leaning in slightly, the way I do in negotiations, when I want somebody to feel like I'm letting them in on something. My family takes formal occasions seriously. My kids would never forgive me if we didn't do this right. I paused. We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Saturday. Nothing extravagant. Family, good food, a toast. My family just needs to welcome the people who matter to Danielle before we get to the altar. Preston glanced at Linda. Half a second of quiet calculation. "We'd be honored," he said. Danielle grabbed my hand under the table so fast I felt it in my shoulder. "Perfect," I said. I smiled at her. She smiled back. A full, radiant, triumphant smile. The smile of a woman who believes she's already won. The trap was already built. She just walked into it smiling. If you've been with me a while, drop your comments below. Go on and hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed while you're at it. Over the following 6 days, I moved careful and quiet. Monday, I drove back to Ellery. I called Harold from the driveway before I even knocked. He opened the door before I finished knocking. We sat in the same kitchen, same coffee, same table. I told them about the lunch, about Preston and Linda Callahan, about the whole performance, about the engagement dinner I'd arranged. I told them I wanted them there. Barbara's hands went still around her coffee cup. "Walt, we don't want to make a scene." "Barbara." I looked at her straight on. "My daughter is going to stand in a church and welcome anybody who walks through those doors into our family. She deserves to know who she's really welcoming." I paused. "And you've been sending birthday cards for 2 years that came back unopened. You deserve to be in that room, not for drama, because you're her parents, and somebody has to say it out loud." Harold leaned over and covered Barbara's hand with his. He looked at me. "What time should we be there?" "Tuesday." I sat down with Renee and Cornell in my office and walked them through every detail. Renee listened, asked 2 sharp questions, then said, "I'll handle the restaurant." She picked up the phone, and that was the end of that conversation. Cornell's reaction required some immediate management. "I want to say something at that door," he growled, narrowing his eyes. "No, Cornell, you say absolutely nothing," I told him, putting both hands on his shoulders. "I need you to do something that's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Not one word until I stand up to make that toast." He looked at the ceiling, then at Renee, who was biting the inside of her cheek. "Fine," Cornell finally hissed, "but I want a double helping of that cornbread before anybody else sits down, and I'm holding that door on the way out." I looked at him and nodded. "That much I can get you." Every piece was in place. The Magnolia House, just outside downtown, was Renee's choice. And it was the right one, a restaurant that felt like somebody's home, not a stage set. Private dining room in the back, white tablecloths, candles, warm lighting. Renee handled the menu herself, and added a small framed photo of my late wife to the welcome table. Because as far as she was concerned, Carol needed to be there too. Harold and Barbara Marsh drove in from Ellery on Saturday morning and checked into a hotel nearby. Harold called me Thursday night to confirm. His voice was steady and careful, and at the end of the call, after we'd gone over the details, he said quietly, "Walt, whatever happens tomorrow in that room, thank you for driving out to Ellery, for knocking on that door." He paused. "She chose well. She just doesn't know it yet." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told him, "See you tomorrow, Harold." I pressed my suit Friday night. I climbed into bed beside Danielle, who was already asleep, already dreaming, I imagined, about the version of tomorrow she'd built in her head. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought about a man in a faded Panthers t-shirt watering a flower bed on Willow Creek Lane, a sealed birthday card with a red stamp across the front, a kitchen table where two people had been waiting quietly for 2 years for somebody to finally show up. Somebody was going to show up tomorrow. So were they. You can build a lie as tall as you want, but the moment the right people walk through that door, the whole thing comes down. I woke up that Saturday morning in September with a stillness that doesn't come from peace, it comes from certainty. I lay there a few minutes listening to Danielle in the bathroom, the shower running, the hair dryer, the particular rhythm of a woman preparing for a performance she believes she's already won. And I thought about Harold Marsh pressing his one good jacket in a hotel room in Charlotte. Barbara standing in front of a mirror trying to hold herself together. Two people who drove 90 minutes down the highway for a dinner their own daughter had no idea they'd been invited to. Get up, Walt. Let's finish this. Danielle took nearly 3 hours to get ready. 3 hours. I sat in the living room watching the pregame highlights with the volume low and let her have every minute of it. She came out twice to ask my opinion. Once about earrings, once about shoes, and both times I told her she looked beautiful. Because she did. That was never the problem. The problem was everything hiding underneath the beauty. She wanted to leave early to check the setup. I told her to go ahead, that I had a quick call to make, and would meet her there. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door with the look of a woman who believed every piece of her life had finally fallen into place. The moment that door closed, I picked up my phone and called Harold. He answered on the first ring. "You all right?" I asked. "We're ready." His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd already made his peace. "Barbara's dressed. We're ready. Good. When I text you, you come in. Doesn't matter what's happening at that table. You just walk in and stand there. You don't have to say one word." A pause. "Harold, yeah, she's going to see you the second that door opens. I know. I've been getting ready for 2 years. I've been ready since the night she blocked us. Every birthday of Barbara's that went by without a single call, I was getting ready." Another pause, shorter this time. "We'll be there." I held the phone a second after he hung up. Then I put on my jacket, found the ring box in my inner pocket, and walked out the door. The Magnolia House on a Saturday night is exactly what it should be. Warm, welcoming, the smell of butter and rosemary greeting you at the door like an old friend. But the private dining room in the back runs at a different frequency. Quieter, deliberate, white tablecloths, low light, round tables arranged so everybody can see everybody else. Renee had been there since 4 that afternoon. When I walked in at 6:30, she was adjusting the centerpieces with the focused energy of a woman who understands that the details of a room tell people how seriously you're taking them. She looked up when I came in and studied my face the same way she has since she was old enough to have something to hide. "You okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She crossed the room and put both hands on my face. She stared at me a long moment. "Your mama," she said quietly, "used to say the truth always finds the most uncomfortable seat in the room, even when nobody invited it." She smoothed my collar. "Let it sit tonight." I nearly lost it right there. Nearly. My brother Cornell stood near the bar talking to my grandson-in-law, already dressed sharp in his dark gray suit, completely calm. He looked at me when I walked over. One slow nod. That nod said, "Everything's ready. The room's set. Do what you came to do." Cornell sat at a side table with a plate piled high with cornbread and the focused expression of a man honoring a solemn obligation. He caught my eye. pointed at the plate, then pointed at me. His version of, I held up my end. Don't forget yours. I nearly smiled. They arrived at 7. I heard Danielle's laugh in the hallway before the door even opened. That particular social laugh, half a note higher than her real one, the one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's even walked into it. She came in first. Navy dress, hair done perfect, every detail in place. Preston Callahan followed behind her. Silver hair, expensive suit, moving with the natural authority of a man who's never once doubted his right to be wherever he is. Linda beside him, elegant and polished, pearls at her collar. Danielle moved through that room like it belonged to her. She kissed Renee on both cheeks. She shook my hand with both of hers. She laughed at something Linda said near the drinks table and touched her arm warm and easy. She was magnificent, genuinely, terrifyingly magnificent. When she got to me, she looped her arm through mine and leaned in close. This is perfect, she whispered. Your family is amazing. This is everything I wanted. I know, I said. That's why I did it. She heard a compliment. I meant something else entirely. We sat down. Food came out. Grilled trout, short ribs, a feast Renee had personally planned down to the last detail. Warm bread, arriving in a basket, wrapped in cloth. The table filled with the easy noise of what looked like a real family dinner. Preston was gracious and attentive, asking Cornell about the construction business with what looked like genuine interest. Linda complimented Renee on the restaurant choice, and Renee received the compliment kindly, while privately thinking things I'll never fully understand. Danielle was glowing, relaxed, victorious. I ate. I laughed, at the right moments. I refilled glasses, asked questions, and from the outside, I was a man completely at ease, enjoying a family dinner. My phone sat face down in my jacket pocket. There was one text I still had to send. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came at 7:48, in the short lull between the main course and whatever came next. The table was warm, the wine was flowing, and Danielle was laughing full and easy at something Preston had said. I pulled out my phone and typed one word to Harold. Then I stood up. The clean, sharp sound of a knife against a glass, the kind that tells a room, stop, listen. The table went still. Danielle looked at me with that full, radiant smile, the smile of a woman who thinks the next 60 seconds are going to be a toast about how much I love her. I let the silence stretch one beat longer than felt comfortable. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. My voice was calm, steady, the way my father used to speak when something in our family actually mattered. A dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It says, these people are real. These people matter. We don't say that lightly. I looked slowly around the table. My father taught me that the people you choose to bring into a moment tell you exactly who you are. I paused. So I wanted to make sure we had the right people at this table tonight. I looked over at Marion, the restaurant's manager, standing near the back wall. She'd been briefed. She knew her cue. She walked to the side door and opened it. And then Harold and Barbara Marsh walked in. Harold in his one good navy jacket, the kind that's clearly been saved for important occasions for years. Barbara in a deep burgundy dress, a small purse held tight in both hands, chin lifted, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd decided she was not going to fall apart in public, no matter what happened next. They crossed that room into the silence, and Danielle saw them. I was watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color drained out of it like a tide pulling back. Fast, complete, absolute. Her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, went completely still. The glass tipped. I reached over without looking at her and steadied it. Set it down easy on the linen. She turned to me. Her eyes ran the fast calculation of somebody searching for whatever story might still save her. I could watch it happening in real time. The search for an exit, an angle, some version of this she could still control. Walt. Her voice came out thin, almost nothing. I went to Ellery, I said. Quiet. Not for the room. I wasn't performing for anybody. I talked to them 3 weeks ago. I drove out there on a Saturday morning because I told myself, maybe I can fix this for her. Maybe I can give her family back to her, as a wedding gift. I let that land. I found a man watering his flower bed on Willow Creek Lane in a Panthers t-shirt. I told him my name and he dropped his garden hose. The room had gone tense. Danielle, your father worked the postal route for 29 years. Your mother was a school secretary for most of your childhood. They helped put you through college, and they did it without you owing a single dollar because they wanted you to have everything. My voice stayed even, steady. They offered you $12,000 from their retirement, and you told them if they couldn't fund your life, they didn't exist in it. Her mouth opened. You don't understand everything that happened. I sat in their kitchen, I said quietly, like a door closing. I saw your school pictures on the refrigerator. I held the birthday card you mailed back to our address unopened. And while I was sitting there, you texted me telling me your parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch. I turned to Preston and Linda Callahan. Linda had both hands flat on the table in front of her, her face gone completely pale. Preston had gone still. Preston, Linda. My voice shifted, something calm and respectful. I know exactly what she told you. She told you my family was deeply judgmental, that her real parents had passed away years ago, and she asked you to play the role of honorary family mentors so she wouldn't have to face a big traditional wedding alone. She used your kindness and your standing as a tool to fill two empty chairs on a stage. I gestured to Harold and Barbara, standing near the door. But these are her real parents. Linda looked at Danielle, a long, slow look, the kind that doesn't need words because words wouldn't be enough anyway. Then she looked at Harold and Barbara, and something crossed her face that was worse than anger. It was recognition. The specific recognition of a woman who just understood that the person she thought she knew doesn't exist. Preston didn't say a word. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, the gesture of a man leaving who's decided there's nothing left worth saying. I turned to Danielle one last time. She'd stopped looking for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She just looked at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. The full architecture of everything she'd built was reflecting back at her off every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat everybody, like they mattered. The man who parks the cars, the woman who cleans the office, the retired mail carrier out in Ellery who gave everything and got told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measuring stick I was raised with. Not the address, not the job title, not the clothes. I looked at her. By that measure, I don't know who you are. I took the ring out of my pocket. I set it down on the white linen tablecloth in front of her. Not thrown, not dramatic, just set down, quiet. The way you put something down when you've been carrying it too long, and you're finally ready to let it go for good. Then I picked up the floral centerpiece sitting in the middle of our table. White flowers. Simple. Renee's choice. And I walked across the room to where Barbara Marsh was standing. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, in her shoulders, in the careful way she was breathing, short and controlled. The way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to drop it in public. I held out the flowers. She looked at them, then at me, then at Harold, who had driven 90 minutes from Ellery and, wearing her best dress, had held her chin high through the hardest walk of her life. She took the flowers and came completely apart. Not a cry, a release, the kind that comes after 2 years of held-back grief finally finding somewhere to go. Harold wrapped his arm around her before she made a single sound. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, his chin steady. He pulled her close and looked at me over the top of her head. And then he did something I wasn't expecting. He stepped forward, one step. Barbara still curled under his arm, and he held his free hand out to me. I shook it. He gripped hard, the grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't quite manage. I held it a moment. Then I stepped back. My brother Cornell was beside me. I don't know exactly when he'd moved. Cornell shows up when it counts. That's just what he does. He looked at Harold Marsh a moment. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm Cornell, he said. Should have met you a long time ago. I'm sorry. Harold shook his hand and swallowed once. Harold. A breath. Thank you for raising a man like that. Cornell glanced at me sideways. Just for a second. Just long enough. In 62 years, I don't think I'd ever seen my brother look that proud. My daughter didn't shake Barbara's hand. She pulled her into a full hug, both arms, immediate, unconditional. The way this family holds on to anybody who needs holding on to. Barbara held on tight. The flowers were still in her hands. We walked out together. Renee, Cornell, and the Marshes. Renee's arm looped through Barbara's. Cornell and Harold walked side by side with the quiet ease of two men who'd just recognized something special in each other. My grandson-in-law held doors. Cornell brought up the rear. He stopped at the front door, turned around just once. I looked back too. Danielle was sitting at the center of that table in her perfect dress, in her perfectly constructed life. The ring lying on the linen in front of her, the centerpiece gone. Preston and Linda Callahan were standing at the back of the room. Linda already had her coat on. Preston had his hand on her back, neither one looking at Danielle as they moved toward the exit. Her friends, the polished social circle she'd built, performed for, and constructed her entire second identity around, sat frozen in their chairs, with the particular discomfort of people who've just witnessed something they can't forget and don't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered a version of events that made her look better. Nobody stepped in to play the part she needed because there were no parts left to play. The whole cast had walked out. She just sat there, finally, irreversibly, seen. Cornell stared at her a long moment. Then he shook his head once, slow, almost sad, and let the door close behind him. Outside on the sidewalk, in the clean, cool air of a September night, downtown Charlotte moved around us, like it had no idea what had just happened inside that restaurant. I stood next to my brother and took a deep breath. He put his hand on the back of my neck, something he's done since we were boys. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Carol would have done the exact same thing. That was it. That was all he said. Across the sidewalk, Harold Marsh looked out at the Charlotte skyline with Barbara tucked under his arm, the white flowers still in her hands. Both of them breathing the same cool September air, like people who'd just gotten back something they'd stopped believing they'd ever see again. Harold caught me looking. He gave one nod, not a thank you, something there isn't really a word for. I nodded back. Some deals you close for profit. Some you close because there's no version of yourself you can live with if you walk away from the table. That night, I closed the most important deal of my life, and I didn't make a single dollar. Some women erase the people who love them just to make room for who they'd rather be. Danielle built an entire life on top of that erasure. And on a Saturday night in September, in a private dining room at a restaurant just outside downtown Charlotte, every single floor of it came down. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching this from tonight. I'll see you in the next one.